If you've been watching the channel, you know I really like using the information ratio because the information ratio is a way of comparing whether or not two different portfolios are giving you consistent returns. And it's a really simple ratio that you can use to show whether or not putting more types of stocks into one thing or the other, and whether or not it's going to give you consistent returns over time. And that's a good way of comparing, especially if each thing holds different asset types or different, just different stocks in general. So what today we are doing is taking a look at whether uh, these ETFs. So let's back up a little bit. My idea with this is to use first we're going to get the S&P 500 index. We're going to have a healthcare portfolio. This is just going to represent a sector of the biggest healthcare equities out there, and whether or not just having a portfolio where we are bought into these equities would provide, what kind of returns they would give us. And then we're going to compare each sector ETF against our portfolio and the market as a whole. So this is not a portfolio of ETFs. This is just a list of ETFs that hold different healthcare stocks and equities. Now, granted, these are not just trying to track the healthcare sector. Some of these are. Some of these are just like bio-industrial equity stocks. Some of these are healthcare growth. Some of these are healthcare blue. So the idea here is to see whether or not we can just buy, like if we wanted to compare which one of these ETFs gave us the most consistent returns, we could, and we're going to compare that against our portfolio, and then we'll visualize if whether or not these sector ETFs are even beating the market or not. So we're going to initialize our lists of things. We're going to get our start and end date. I'm using the past 3 years. I have this little function here that just grabs the data and calculates the portfolio returns. And I use that on the healthcare returns, the index, and I rename them healthcare and S&P 500. And when I look at our healthcare stock portfolio versus our index returns, you can see this is what we have here, daily returns plus or minus across time. Now this big old ugly cell here is just going through and performing the same thing up here, except we're just iterating through our list of ETFs and initializing each one individually. So we've downloaded them all, and now we're just looking at XLV returns plot versus the S&P 500 and the healthcare index. Right off the bat, you can see that the returns are much, like in terms of variance, are much greater with just buying into the portfolio. And you can see that the ETFs are a lot less volatile. Volatile, or the returns are just not as variant. And so we do this for each one. This is like me going through and looking at each ETF. So the idea here is if you wanted to do this on your own, you would go through, you do some preliminary research on which ETF you're interested in, and then you could perform some code like what I'm showing you here to evaluate on a more, I guess, algorithmic way to compare the different returns against your portfolio, the healthcare portfolio, and just the market in general. And they pretty much all look the same here. You're just going to see that the healthcare portfolio is just going to have greater returns, and you're going to have like greater losses as well. So when we calculate the information ratio, what you're doing is you are taking a benchmark returns and you're taking your portfolio returns, you're subtracting it from the benchmark returns. That's going to be your active return. And your tracking error is the standard deviation of your active return. And then you take the average active return divided by your tracking error, so your standard deviation. That gives you the information ratio. Now we loop through each ETF and we're using the index returns. Our index returns is the S&P 500, I believe, right? Let me scroll all the way back up here. It must be, yeah. And you can see it. Oh, and then I see. And then now we're using the healthcare sector portfolio and using that and comparing that against the overall market. You can see that these ETFs all give consistently negative returns when we compare it to the index return, which is the S&P 500. So the S&P 500 is just outperforming all of these, which makes sense because we're only comparing one sector versus, um, just like a healthcare returns portfolio. If you're interested, what we could do here now is instead of using the S&P 500 as our benchmark, we could use our um, our healthcare returns. The thing is that we can't, if we're going to use our health portfolio, it's not going to make sense to print that out. So now when we compare the active returns, the average active returns divided by the standard deviation against our each ETF versus just having a portfolio, you can see that it's all negative as well. So in this instance, like I wouldn't buy into an ETF sector and expect it to perform better than just having a portfolio of ETFs. Or sorry, let me rephrase that. Each of these single ETFs don't provide like consistent returns versus just having a portfolio of healthcare stocks in it. It tends to do better. It'd be interesting to see if we had a portfolio of each sector ETF. So if we had like a healthcare sector, we had defense sector, industrial sector, technology sector ETF, and then we compared that against the market to see if it would do better than like SPY or something like that, what the effects would be there. If you enjoy these types of videos and these code notebooks, consider going to this link here and supporting me. You can provide a one-time tip or donation. It really helps me avoid the trap of making a course or shilling out a sponsor. Um, and just, yeah, overall helps me keep the family fed and keep these videos rolling. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.